Everyone to our OECD webinar on advancing gender equality, the crucial role of science and technology. My name is Marta Encinas Martin, and I'm leading the work of gender equality in the Education Directorate at the OECD. The good news we have about equality is that in recent decades, there has been a notable increase in the development of education policies that prioritize gender equality. However, as we're going to see in this webinar, the question is of how effective these policies have been in getting more girls into certain careers or in getting more equality into education. So today we will be exploring this relationship between gender disparities in education and also employment, and how science and technology are related to a wider variety of jobs in creative, financial, and technological and digital industries that today requires STEM careers as well as in green jobs. To help me with this discussion, I am delighted to be joined by João Costa, former Minister of Education from Portugal, and is also our EDPC chair. EDPC is our Education Policy Committee at the OECD, and he's also Professor of Linguistics at the University of Nova in Lisbon. Laura Rupiani, hello Laura. She is the Chief of Labor Markets and Social Security Division from the IDB, which is the Latino American Development Bank, and Diana Zamora, Global Public Policy Director at MasterCard. We have with us, in order to set the tone of the webinar, also Eric Charbonnier, who is a policy analyst at the OECD, at the Education Directorates. We have a very large audience. There is many of you here connected, and we are very thankful for that. We have the chat, the Zoom chat function available for you, where you can tell us who you are, where you're from, your interests, your comments, and also ask questions to the panelists, which I'll gladly read to them, if time permitted, of course. But in order to begin the discussion, my colleague Eric Charbonnier will be presenting his recent publication. So Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to participate to this webinar and to show you some slides about the brief that we released some weeks ago on the gender gaps. And I think it can be always useful to have data to initiate a discussion. So I will start with some PISA data, and in fact, just to say, and it's not a surprise for you, that gender stereotype in learning outcome still exists in many countries, and you can see here that the gender gap in reading performance exists in most of countries, with girls are better in reading, and in general, you will see after boys are better in math. The difference is approximately 24 points between girls and boys. It's approximately 1 year of schooling. So this is quite interesting. And when we are looking at other studies, we see that these gender gaps in favor of girls in reading exist at early ages. Other studies like PIRLS for first grade of primary education shows that this gap exists already in primary education. In maths, there's 9 points of difference in favor of boys. So, again, there's a gender gap, but we have narrowed a bit when we do the comparison to the year 2015. But what is interesting, to my opinion, is to look at the top performers. When you are looking at the triangles, the blue triangles, this is the 10 best performers in all the countries. You see that the gender gaps in favor of boys is higher than if you take all the students together. So that shows there's still a problem in mathematics today, and also in reading. Some things that seems to me important to mention. This is in fact, there's no two stereotype, but one stereotype to my opinion, because what you see in this chart, this is a strong negative correlation across OECD country between gender gaps in mathematics and reading. If you look at Italy, for example, the red circle, you see that Italy has a below average gender gap in reading, but an above average gender gap in mathematics, and the same picture is found in many countries. You see Finland, for example, the gender gaps in reading is really big, high in favor of girls, and the opposite is found in mathematics. So that's something to keep in mind, I think, when we are doing analysis on this topic. It has an impact, of course, this gender gaps in learning outcomes. It has an impact in the completion of secondary studies. We know that men are often overrepresented in vocational education. It has an impact also in the completion of tertiary studies. And you can see here that you have approximately 44% of girls who succeeded to complete tertiary education on time. When we are looking at the proportion of boys, it's only 1/3, so this is significantly lower. And if you look at after 3 years, you see that the completion rate is increasing, but the gap is still existing with 73% of women who succeeded to complete tertiary education, again 61% of men. So there's a kind of message that now this is something that we see in all the indicators. Girls are completing more often tertiary education than boys. They attend tertiary education, but there's still some gap in the field of study chosen. And you can see that girls are underrepresented in the field of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in STEAM, and overrepresented in other fields of studies like education and health and welfare. There's a big difference in STEAM. There's only in Iceland, New Zealand, Greece, Italy, on the left part of the chart, that the proportion of new entrants in STEAM is close or above 40%. What is, to my opinion, interesting also, this is, I said before that girls are overrepresented in the field of education, but when you look at tertiary staff, the teachers working in tertiary education, they are underrepresented. So that means they can be a new entrant and graduate for the field of education, same field of education, but they still less employed than men in the top job in this field. So this is one of the results. And just to be positive also, when you see with the data of 2005, there's a slight improvement in between 2005 and 2020. This is an important message on many of the charts that I will show you. This is the gap between boys and girls, between women and men in education, beyond education on the labor market still exists, but there's some small progress in comparison to a decade ago. Last chart to show this progress, this is employment gap. We know that the level of education is really important to decrease the gender gap between men and women in terms of employment opportunities. You see here something that is really interesting. The gender gap for those 25, 34 years old graduate with a tertiary qualification is 6 percentage points between men and women in favor of men. It was 9 percentage points in 2015. So this is an improvement. And when you look at all the countries on this chart, we see an improvement in 2/3 of OECD countries. It's also really visible in Slovak Republic, Korea, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Hungary, Slovenia. This is the country when you see the biggest difference on this chart. And this is the result of initiative, because most of the countries have taken some initiative for reduction of gender gap in education and beyond education on the labor market. In Korea, for example, there's many initiatives to help women to combine work and family life. In Hungary, there's also some reforms that has been made to attract the women in the fields that are dominated by men. So there's still some effort to do, but we see on this chart that some small progress has been made. That's the same in terms of earnings. There's always differences between men and women. Women earn 26% less than men with a tertiary qualification. That's still a lot. That's small improvement in comparison to 2013. And what is also negative with this picture. When we do the comparison on the same field of education, we still see some gender gaps. That means you can be graduate from the same diploma, from the same field of education, but gender gap exists. So there's still some effort to arrive to the parity, but also I would like to finish that some progress has been made over the last decade. And it's important because the countries invested resources, and these small progress are maybe the beginning of better progress in the future. Thank you very much. I hope I was not too long. It's difficult to show all this data in few minutes.
Thank you very much, Eric. No, you were not too long. I could listen to you for much longer. This is a very interesting data. I love the edit you wrote, and I encourage everyone to read it for more details on findings, which are not very encouraging for women, I must say, especially those studying STEM. And for that, we have here João Costa. As I say, he's a former Minister of Education by 2 days. He's changed his position just 2 days ago. And I know you have been a very good advocate for gender and STEM. You actually came to the OECD STEM conference that we organized in Madrid during the Spanish European presidency. And I wanted to ask you one question. We have seen that countries have implemented many programs and to try to get more girls in STEM careers. But Eric's data shows that the success has been very limited. Why do you think these programs don't seem to have the desirable results?
Okay, so good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Marta for this initiative and for the invitation, and also Eric for this really rich data. This is my first event after stepping down as minister, so I'm particularly happy to be here with the freedom of not having a political position anymore. And yeah, there are programs, and coming from Portugal, we are in a kind of comfortable position to comment on this because we have 57% of women in university programs in science and technology. But we see that when we scope down into the programs, there are still big gaps when we look at the subtypes of scientific and technology programs that are chosen. For instance, in ICT, it's still a very male-dominant set of programs. There are programs, there are plans, there are projects. We have a long-standing program that invites young girls from elementary school to be engineers for 1 day, for 1 week, depending on how schools take this program. But as you're saying, this is not enough if there is no consistent and coherent intentionality in ways that are broader than just these events or campaigns that we do. And I think that this gender gap remains because we have to dismantle some fallacies that still exist. And I'd like to point down 2 or 3. One is the fallacy of a natural vocation. So this idea that is still around, that the brain of women and the brain of men is different, and that explains some natural vocations that can go from a natural vocation for science versus humanities, or a natural vocation for ironing and cleaning versus not doing anything. And what we know from the neurosciences contradicts now very strongly this type of views. We know that the brain is plastic, and because it is plastic, the role of the social impact of what happens in our brains is very big. So no one is sentenced by birth to take some kind of path, and this has to be known. This has to be discussed in our societies. Then there is the heavy burden of stereotypes, and they are still around. And I think the most complicated when we talk about the failure of some of these projects is the silent stereotypes, the role or the essence of the role models. girls have to be exposed to female scientists who are successful and who are never compared to men. We still hear these things like, oh, she's so successful in a world of men, she's like one of them. And we have to talk about this. We have to say, no, she's a woman. She's not acting as if she was a man. And she's successful because she's successful, and the gender doesn't matter. And this is my last line. I've been advocating for a long time the role of citizenship education in the national curricula. And this is very, very debated and fought against in some countries, here in Portugal as well. Having gender equality in the curriculum is very important, because this is an opportunity to be explicit about it, to show that when we're talking about gender equality, we are not talking about opinions, we are talking about human rights, to have cross-disciplinary approaches to gender equality, to use the sciences, to use what happens in the humanities, to show the youngsters that when we're talking about gender equality, it's not only some kind of ideology, it's really about equality and about equal opportunities, and that when we are feminists, we are not just waving some flag, we are talking about real life and real people.
Thank you very much, Joao, for your answer. I fully agree. I mean, there is this natural idea, or this idea that is in some countries, that girls should study humanities and boys science. There are regions where it's not the case. We see it in PISA, how the expectations of girls, for example, in the Middle East, North Africa, Arab countries, they tend to study STEM. But it's not so much the case of Latin America. And since Laura Rupián is here from us, who works at the IDB, I want to ask her about women in this region. Over there, women have more years of education than men on average. But what do you think they still struggle with the lower labor market participation, which is strikingly low in Latin America? The gender wage gaps are high, and overall, they participate more on informality. Thanks.
Thank you, Marta, for the question, and thank you for the invitation to this panel today. That is totally true. It's quite puzzling that in Latin America and the Caribbean, on average, women have a higher number of years of education, but they have less access to quality jobs than men, and therefore fewer opportunities to access leadership positions. And one of the problems that we observe in the region is the high occupational segregation. Women are more concentrated in sectors and occupations with lower earnings. For example, employment levels, job quality, and wages are proven to be better in the STEM sector, or STEAM sector with an A for arts. However, by 2022, only 3 out of 10 workers in the area of mathematics and computer science in the region were women, and less than 10% of software developers in Latin America and the Caribbean are women. We need then more women in STEAM jobs. That starts in education and job training, where there are many obstacles for women to advance in their STEAM careers, and there are instances of discrimination and gender bias prior to work. In the LAC region, a gender bias persists in enrollment in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics-related careers, with women already account for 60% of the graduates in tertiary and university degrees, but they only represent 30% of graduates in STEM careers, revealing then the low propensity to choose careers corresponding to these high productivity sectors. And as a consequence, they would have higher salaries if they choose to go to this type of careers. And the problem is deeper in the most mathematics intensive fields of study, such as technology and engineering, where approximately 28% of graduates are women. And this represents a loss for the region, as it has been found that workers with STEM careers tend to have lower levels of unemployment and higher wages than the counterparts. So we can actually reverse the trend for women in terms of their labor market outcomes if we encourage more women to participate in this type of careers. So I will reflect on a couple of things that I think are necessary to move the needle in terms of this problem. One of them is that post-secondary institutions, many institutions in the region, education, training institutions, public and private, they still need to advance in terms of relating the demands that are in the labor market with the changes in the curricula. So one thing, like the basis, is to have more careers that are related to the jobs of the future. And this changing curricula takes time and effort. And this is something that we have to promote more in Latin America and Caribbean. But regarding girls and young women, a special effort should be placed in more vocational orientation, starting from little girls in primary school to secondary school. But still, women that are in the labor market already have ways to attract them to these STEM careers is very important. So, for example, for women in the labor market, there should be upskilling and reskilling policies so they can move careers, even from fields like, let's say, nursing or other fields that they have a lot of socio-emotional skills that they use day to day to work. Adding the technical skills for the STEM careers could move them to a new field that pays more. And I also agree with Carmen from Italy in the chat was mentioning, and Joao also mentioned the importance of role models. If we have more women in this field, we can have these role models that can attract more women that they are gonna think, okay, so this is a great field for me, I belong here, I can do well, I can have success in this STEM career, so I will go there and study this field. So I also really like that Joao mentioned the word intentionality. I think in the design of policies, the education policies and training policies, it's very important to have intentionality to bring more women and girls to this field. So design gender-oriented policies in this field, it's very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura, for this comprehensive answer. You mentioned the importance of role models. And I want to ask Diana Zamora, who is Global Public Policy Director in MasterCard. And MasterCard is a technology company that needs STEM professionals. How do you experience the gender gap within STEM, and what can be done to close the gap and to also have more role models? Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Really happy to be here. This is a topic that is very close to my heart. And as you mentioned, MasterCard is a technology company. However, 85% of buying decisions are controlled by women. And we need to make sure that we are designing, preparing relevant products for everyone. And one thing is to inspire girls and being role models, but another one is to retain these women in a safe environment where they feel that they belong and that they can grow. And there are basically three things that we have identified that allow us to retain women and to keep them within these fields. So very basic, and this is not rocket science, right? This is not very hard to do. So first, parental leave, equal parental leave. We have 16 weeks, regardless of your gender. And that allows our employees, for instance, to feel really welcomed and also to come back energized and really happy to come back. The other is we have no harassment policies and a no retaliation policy. So we know that when women are not feeling welcomed within their work environment, that can diminish the amount of ideas that they can share, and of course the rate of innovation that we can see. So that is, we make it very explicitly, we take it very seriously. The other is that we pay the same amount of money for the same level of for the same job, one by one. And this is very basic stuff. Across the board, there's still gender gaps in pay, and we take this very seriously. And Laura was mentioning intentionality. We're very intentional. We recently attached executive pay to closing the 8% gender gap, because yes, by the same level of employment, we pay the same, but when women are going up the ladder, we're missing some women. So we are putting the money where our mouth is, basically trying to close these remaining gaps. So first, when we start changing stereotypes on who should be taking care of the kids, we're opening that door for both genders. We're making sure that there's no retaliation or any harassment within the workplace. That is absolutely basic. And we're being very intentional on both paying the same for the same job, but also increasing executive pay when we are closing the gender gap. So we recently did a study, and we're missing a lot of women, particularly in cybersecurity. We're launching some specific programs to be role models, but also, like Laura was mentioning, we're trying to reskill some of our current employees that know payment very well, and trying to introduce them into cybersecurity. As I said, this is not rocket science, and it takes an intentional effort and a public-private dialogue, just like this one. Because yes, there is a lot that public policies can do, but it's within the private sector, mostly, where these women are going to be working. And we have to make sure that they feel welcomed and that they have a clear path for growth. So yeah, we take this very seriously.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Diana, for very great insights. And this brings me to a question I have from my colleague, Eric. When I read your paper, you mentioned in the paper that gender gaps and social inequality are not related in straightforward ways, right? And education policies that favor equality have also proliferated in recent decades, both during and after education. Why do you think that those changes, those policies, those programs have not been effective?
Yes, that's a good question, and that's important to mention, because often the focusing on the inequalities related to the social economic background. And when a country succeeded to decrease these inequalities, the feeling it is a good country. But in fact, what we see in the brief, there's many countries who are not too bad in terms of equity in PISA when we are looking at the social economic background, but who have some gender problems. This is the case of some Nordic country, of Finland, for example. And to my opinion, it's often the same problem. There's many initiatives that are taken, but often these initiatives are not assessed, are not evaluated, and we have difficulties to measure the progress. And that's a challenge for countries. And also another challenge, this is the gender gap, especially on the labor market, can be related to the education system. If your early childhood education system and care is not sufficiently developed, it will be difficult for women with young children to reconcile work and family life. So finally, the challenges are not the same between countries, but my recommendation will be to have a clear assessment of the progress, to have some benchmark, and it will be maybe a good solution.
Thank you, Eric. Did you mention the women with young children, family balance? However, in other webinars we had, or in other in the conferences about gender equality, we see that in ICTs there is hardly any women. They are not studying technological careers. And programming is a very easy work job to balance, because often you can do it from wherever you want, from home, on your own time. So that's interesting that even though that's that has you can have a family. I mean, a programmer, there is still no women, so probably it's still a heavy stereotype, right? And I want to have a question as a question to Joao and Diana, to both. Joao from the just former Minister of Education, but working on the education more political side, and to Diana from the business perspective, private sector. We have seen that there is many initiatives in STEM. You just mentioned Engineering for a Day. There is Girls Who Code. Every country has their own from the ministers of education, but private sector as well. Diana mentioned also from MasterCard, but many other businesses are doing things to encourage girls to go into STEM. What can both the public sector and the private sector do better in order to work together so we can actually reach the goal of getting more girls and women into STEM?
Do you want to start, Diana? Okay. Well, I think one key factor is partnership. So there's no point in having very active programs in education, in schools, in universities, if then by the end women will find all kinds of obstacles and barriers in the private sector when they are being hired. And we still hear stories about questions on whether you're planning to get pregnant. When we see the data that we have more here in Portugal, we have more women who graduate from university, but then when we look at the higher positions in private firms, it's mostly a male-dominated world, and we don't have as many female CEOs as we have male CEOs. So if there is no close cooperation, and I must say, if there is no legislation, we need to legislate while it is necessary to using a strong word, to force gender equality also in the private sector, in promoting shares for hiring, in promoting ways for women to be protected in their jobs and careers. It's I would not say useless, but it's more difficult for the public sector to work with the private sector. So I really think that cooperation and also using firms, companies that can also be role models for other companies and firms to show that it is possible, it is feasible, it is better to have balanced teams. It is better to have complementarity in the firms. So I would say that partnership and showing what is good, having showcase evidence, so that we are based on data. Someone said this in the chat. We have to be based on data, on evidence, and not just on opinions. Because if we are only basing ourselves on opinions, it's a sterile discussion, because you say, well, I disagree, so what? But then when we have evidence and data, it's much easier and fruitful to have rich discussions and change.
Thank you. On data, we are very good at that at the OECD. So for that, Diana.
I fully agree with Joao. I think the starting point is to have close communication between what you are building within the firm and what the educational system is trying to bring to students. We are living in a very changing world. For instance, there are products for AI that we couldn't have envisioned 5 years ago. But this close communication can allow us to foresee what is going to be needed and what are those competencies and those skills that are going to be in high demand. So we've been running one of our programs that try to role model this. It is called Girls for Tech. We've been running it for now 10 years. And it's hard because we targeted girls between 8 and 10 years, and we bring them with a curriculum and focus on coding. Now we are including cyber, AI for good. But now talking about data, there's a lot of time between being exposed to the program and then becoming an employee. But now we're starting to see that pipeline because now it's been 10 years. And we're starting to see that this is still very early to say, but it's efficient. It's good because how can we link these two? Yes, we inspire girls and we bring what we have within the firm to tell them, and we do it in very funny ways and engaging ways. Now we have translated into 10 different languages, and so, but how are we making sure that these two things are possible? We're starting to see, we recently hired a couple of students that were exposed some 10 years ago into the program. And as I mentioned, this is very early, but I think the key is to keep this communication going between the private and the public sector, because this is such a huge challenge and the pace of advancement is so slow that we need all of us and all of our brains put together to solve this.
Thank you. No, I fully agree. Let's hope that we can get this agreement, this alliance between the private sector, the public sector, the universities, so we can ally. And because, I mean, we are really investing millions of dollars into getting, in the Western countries, into getting more girls into STEM. And so far, maybe this will pay off in the longer run. But so far, we haven't seen advancements as Eric show us. And it is important because there is new there is new jobs coming in creative industries. For example, where we required a lot of technical and digital skills, green jobs as well coming, where you're required to study STEM. And I want to ask Laura Rupiani, because I know the IDB has been working on the creative industries. You call it the orange economy, right? And there are many positions that are opening and want to open in Latin America. And how do you see these markets, and how important is it to promote STEM careers for the next generation, particularly achieving gender balance?
Thank you, Marta. I'd like to start by giving you some numbers on how I see these markets. The creative economy is growing a lot. There has been remarkable growth in the past decade, accounting at the global level for 3% of global GDP and employing more than 48 million people around the world. Therefore, we should not underestimate the power of the A in STEAM. It's crucial to promote STEAM careers for the next generation. In that sense, I think that promoting the STEM A is an interactive A. That is, the interaction between the technological and the digital worlds with the world of creativity and arts is essential. We have to take into consideration that the future of work is very interdisciplinary and more and more dynamic than ever before in history, and implies a greater need for students and young people to adapt to this changing nature of work. And there is a lot to be gained by crossing then the creative industries with the STEM field. Creative industries bring a unique perspective and specialized skills to STEM that can drive innovation and technological development. For example, the user experience design is essential in technology development. The intersection between graphic design for the web and technological skills and trades is perhaps the best example that we can have of a fruitful encounter between the two worlds that, if you think about it, were traditionally very separate, but now we can join these two worlds in a very productive and interesting way for women and for girls that many of them, they are very artistic and they would like to express the artistic side, but with technology, we can join these two worlds. It's very interesting. Both the STEM field and the field of creative and cultural industries, or the orange economy, like you mentioned, we call it at the IDB, can enhance and benefit from each other. In fact, there is an Inter-American Development Bank study that identified more than 50 successful cases in 11 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean in the publishing, culture, interactive games, new media, and creative services sectors that use technology as a cross-cutting axis. So all of these give us hope. It makes us think that yes, we can and should support STEAM careers for women, and the A within STEAM can serve as an anchor to bring more women, and not only to the arts and creativity world, but also to the more traditional STEM areas, or a mixture of them. As I mentioned, that is something extremely important, and that we will therefore need to give more information. Again, the information is essential about the labor market trends, what is more demanded in the new world of work, and promote more and better vocational guidance services. This is essential again at an early age, not only for the girls, but also for the broader context. Families are very, very key. When I chose my career as an economist, I didn't have parents that were economists. So it's always difficult when you don't have these role models and this information about the labor market to choose a career in the STEAM field. So I think vocational orientation, families involved, promoting this access to these careers is very, very important.
Thank you, Laura. You all mentioned role models, stereotypes, and how they influence girls and boys, which is very interesting. However, I saw something in Eric's presentation, and this question is for you, Eric, about, you mentioned, I mean, and we know for the PISA data over the years that boys are not as good in reading as girls are, right? And also you show in the data that boys tend not to choose teaching careers. I mean, we see in the primary data is around 80% of teachers are women, secondary as well, a bit less, but still a lot. So, and there is a stereotype about women caring, teaching. There is no men being nurses, for example, or very few. However, I was shocked by your data, and one of the slides you saw, it was about tertiary education, because there are more men. Actually, there are more men than women teaching, and teaching is teaching. So there is a stereotype, and women are teachers because they are naturally caring. Why not in university where the salaries are also higher? Why don't we see the same pattern where women are teachers?
Yes, that's a really good question. And in fact, we see that higher is the level of education, lower is the share of women in the teaching profession. They are the large majority in pre-primary education. In secondary education, it's less true. And in tertiary education, there's only few countries with majority of women. So this is related to the choice of study, to my opinion. When you want to become teacher in pre-primary and primary teacher, you look at the background, the diploma of the teacher, and you see that many of them have followed some study in humanities, literature, and they can become teacher. If you want to become a teacher, mathematics teacher in secondary education, you need to have made some scientist studies, and we know that women are underrepresented. To be teacher in tertiary education, you need often to have a doctorate program, and you see again that women are underrepresented in doctorate. So that means the challenge is really to create some vocation, to encourage women to follow the STEAM studies, to be graduate from STEAM, and it will maybe create a better balance in the secondary and tertiary education. And it's so important today because we are in an international context of teacher shortages in most of the country. We have difficulties, for example, to find mathematics teachers in secondary education, academic staff also in tertiary education, because they can prefer to work in the private sector. So that's why it should be a policy priority, because we know that the quality of an education system can be assessed with the quality of its teachers. So maybe that's a good incentive to do more to encourage girls to do some STEAM studies, and and to my opinion.
And boys to do some teaching studies of education and welfare, right? Where we also like boys. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to ask a question. You can all turn your camera on because we're going to go to the audience to see there's been a very active chat and we have many questions. We are sorry we cannot address all, but I'm going to read one from James Michael Walker. And he says, I totally agree with when you say, but without more women, the industry is missing out on a valuable pool of talent that can bring fresh perspectives and innovative ideas. I like to think of this way. If there are no female engineers, how can we solve, for example, problems that only women face? Like inventing a car for comfortable driving for a pregnant woman. How can a problem be solved if the engineers themselves don't have these problems? So we need now more than ever more women into STEM to give their unique perspectives. So anyone wants to react to this comment that we think we all agree?
Totally agree, Marta, if you allow me to. I think diversity at the workplace, diversity when you're studying brings new ideas, new ways of looking at things. And in my experience with working in this field in terms of the labor market, it has been essential to have a diverse group of people to bring ideas to the table. So I think in terms of attracting more women to this field, it's very, very important to have more and more intentionality, as I mentioned before, to have policies in place to attract not only women, but also diverse type women, right? Like race and ethnicity is always something that we should pay attention to. Because if you look at the markets in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's not only the gender, it's also some other aspects that intersect with gender that exclude you from the workplace, exclude you from education. So I think it's very, very important to have a diverse composition all in the school, but also in the labor market.
Thank you. Is there any other reactions? There is another question on the chat that I just lost. Oh yeah, here it is from Nicolas Arias. He said, I want to know how women participation have changed in time. Let's say in the last 40 years. Eric Charbonnier works in our education at a glance, and he is he knows very much about this data, right? So could you say, have you seen the changes over the past 40 years, maybe 20 years in the labor market?
Well, we see some small progress year after year, but it's really small. What I show you, this is progress over the last decade, and you see that there's still a gender gap for those with a tertiary graduation. But what we see with this data for 40 years, that there's still also some difficulties for women with a low level of qualification to find a job. I show you the gender gap for women employment rate for women with a tertiary qualification. But if you look at those with below and upper secondary qualifications, the gender gap is really big and was also big some decade ago. And maybe also in the spirit, because country wants to improve the situation, help people with low level qualification to have a job. Or a possibility for second chance programs. This is maybe here that progress should be made, because my feeling after 25 years of using data and compiling data, there's still some big gap and few progress. So progress are visible for those with the best level of qualification, but not for those with a low level of qualification.
Thank you. Thank you. I have it's interesting here. I have two persons, Miguel Dionis and Adriana Galvani. They are mentioning single education and if it will be best and it will work better. Any ideas? Maybe Joao, since you were Minister of Education.
I couldn't, there was some interference, I couldn't hear the question.
It's about, they said a single education.
Okay, I saw the question in the chat.
Yeah.
Well, I must say I oppose to that, and the reason is is due to my first intervention. This is based on the flawed idea that boys and girls are different in learning. They can be different, some of them. They can be the same. We are all different in learning. We are all very different in learning, no matter what our gender is. Some of us are more visual. Some of us are very good at hands-on approaches to education. Others are very good with a lecture. So this means that we need to diversify teaching methods and assessment methods to reach out to everyone, and also to stimulate those areas in which we are not the typical type of learner. And as Laura was saying, diversity is always good, because diversity prompts empathy, prompts us to see the other person's perspective, the other person's needs. So when we segregate in schools, intentionally or non-intentionally, we are not preparing a generation for coping with what is normal. What is normal is that we are different. Diversity is the place where we live and where some of us want to live. And one thing that is in a way related with this single gender education approach is when we're talking about gender equality, when we're talking about women's access to careers, to leadership, this is not a female problem. This is a problem of the men as well. So feminism is not a cause of women. Feminism is a cause of human rights. So it's about all of us.
Thank you very much, Joao. It's true that segregation in the schools is not a good idea. However, it looks like countries with higher gender equality in the Gender Equality Index seems to have also more segregated career choices, or it seems that career choices seem to be maybe growing in some countries. In any case, they stay there. And we see some, for example, in some Arab countries with girls and boys are separated, with girls seems to be choosing more STEM careers. There is also some studies in Iceland about not segregating the schools, because that's going to be difficult in many countries nowadays, but segregating girls and boys by subject. For example, in maths, maybe girls can study together, and in reading, because we have a big problem with reading and boys drop out, right? Because reading is the base for actually learning other subjects. What do you think about it, for example, Eric, that you see, you've seen the data and how gender equity countries produce segregation in a school?
Mm-hmm. No, that's an important point, and I think we have not talked a lot about teaching method, but to my opinion, that's the key also to have an education system who help to develop the expectation of women to go in STEM field, of boys to develop their interest for reading, who develop the self-confidence of women with a parental engagement. There's a reflection to have, and I can illustrate that with a study in my country. You know, when boys and girls are starting first grade of primary education, age 6, after some years of pre-primary education, they are assessed at the beginning of the year, and their level in mathematics is exactly the same. A similar assessment is made after the end of the first semester of grade 1, and we already see some gender gap in favor of girls in reading, in favor of boys in mathematics. So something is happening in the education system, something is maybe happening in the family, but that should be part of the reflection also. There's something wrong at one point, and we need to stimulate and to adapt the teaching method finally, as we do for disadvantaged students, to girls and boys to develop their skills at their own pace, but to develop their skills.
Thank you, Eric. Indeed, we need to start early, right? Because that's where everything begins. So we need to evaluate teachers, teaching methods, bias, stereotypes. And unfortunately, we are arriving to the end of our webinar. Could chat with you for hours, but I want to end with allowing you, or giving you the last opportunity to say something we should be reflecting on, and then maybe some tips on what we could all do. If you want to start, Diana.
Thank you very much, Marta. I would say two things. One, we talked a lot about role models. My native language is Spanish, and I always try to deflect to the feminine. So if my kids ask, so why is this building this way? I always say probably la arquitecta, the female architect, she thought about this. That's a very easy thing to do, just to open that mind, that piece of information for them, and to consider that I might be wrong half of the time, but the other half I might be okay. Let's deflect for the feminine, because we need those role models every time and every day. And I agree with Joao. I think that the most important thing in this topic on feminism is that men need to enter fully to the house in order for women to enter fully the workforce, and particularly in STEM, where it's so where we need so much more women within the field.
Thanks very much. Who wants to go next? Laura, maybe?
Thank you, Marta. Well, we live in an unequal world. Inequality in Latin America and the Caribbean is pervasive, still very high. And I think one of the ways that we can think of reducing inequality is providing more information about the jobs of the future, and bringing more information to those who are not like entering in the careers of the future. And this opens the space for little girls and women that need that information, need to know the returns to the education in the fields that are growing. So I think it's essential to have these policies in place in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I really like the conversation today that also brings the importance of men in this equation, the voice of men in empowering women to be able to thrive in the world of work. So it's very important to have both men and women promoting this process in the future to have a more equal world. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Laura. Joao, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think that my last thought would be this has all to do with education, and education has this potential of turning what appears to be impossible into possible and breaking cycles. So in many of our countries, in many of our communities, some just think that there are options that are not for them. So young girls think this is not for me. Children from Roma communities say this is not for me. And education has this capacity of telling us all that everything can be for each of us. And so this potential of breaking cycles is really magical in education. So if we invest on gender equality in education, we may change the world.
Thank you. Let's hope that we all do that. Eric?
Yes, to follow, for me, all the measures should be assessed and should start at the early years in education. But we should also look at what is happening once in employment on the labor market, because sometimes the progress that you can see in education are not reflected in the labor market. So maybe in this topic, we need a strong synergy, because the world of education and the world of work to make some progress in education, but also through education.
Thank you very much. So with these words, we're going to end this very insightful webinar. We understood that we need to start early, start in education that can actually break this cycle, as you said, Joao, start at home too. And the collaboration between the private sector and the public sector is essential to encourage girls. And definitely, I keep in mind that we need to evaluate teaching methods. What is happening in the classroom is very important, and something is happening, obviously, because we have a segregated education, even though it's not the intention. So thank you very much. Thank you all for coming and joining us in the chat at the OECD. Thanks, Kevin, who is behind the scene managing all this webinar and organize it. And I hope to see you soon in a new webinar. Bye.